So your deal was, and I think we talked about this, that you were able to get music videos but not be charged for them. Did that dynamic change? Did labels say, hey, you know what, we should be making some money?
We went to the labels to preempt that because we heard rumblings. And this was about the time we were having to face the competitive threat from a cable music channel, which, by the way, lasted on the air 104 days. We decided that we would try and exchange payments to the labels and basically do an output deal with them and pay them for all, and they would then have to supply us every music video they made. But part of that would be we'd be able to take 20% of the videos exclusively for a period, and against a 24-hour, a 30-day window against any other TV exhibitor, and a 6-month window against any 24-hour-a-day competitor. And then they could also put to us 10% of their videos and force us to add them. And we would do these deals with all the major labels. And basically, so we kind of locked up our supply in multi-year deals with the major, all of them probably comprised 90% of the output of music videos. And that, we were then, when we took something exclusively, that would be a whole other form of promotional bells and whistles. They would be fighting for us, please take it exclusively. And of course, we were thinking on a competitive basis, this would be good for us because we could say we've got videos that no one that the other music channel doesn't have. So that process continued, and those deals continued at increasing sums in all the years I was at MTV and Viacom. I think they have a new arrangement now, but I'm not sure how it works.
Well, let me ask you about this. There was, in the early days, there was some criticism that MTV didn't have any black artists, basically, on.
Right.
What was the criticism, and what was her reaction?
The criticism was they'd say, well, you're not playing R&B music. And, and we always say, well, we have Garland Jeffries, we have Prince, we have this guy and that guy. But, in fairness, there was a pretty white bread channel. And there was some of his inside who said, this is a little kind of crazy. We ought to loosen up. I mean, we're really restricting ourselves formatically. We're alienating a certain part of the audience we could get to watch MTV. And that kind of came to a head. And, the real breakthrough there was Michael Jackson, of course, 1984. Not just Thriller, but the predecessor, Beat It, and Billie Jean. Those were epic events, and we began to see, we can move into, we can get a little more flexible here with our musical. We also realized it was a bit under attack. I mean, there was a lot of people at the channel who thought we should have changed sooner. I was the mere marketing guy at the time.
Were the Michael Jackson tracks initially rejected, and then?
No, that's sort of a myth that was created by Walter Yetnikoff.
Okay.
They were accepted.
Was it thought that there was a market for people to buy music videos at that time? Any time, actually?
Yeah, there was. And there was a small market, but it wasn't a lot. I mean, I think people had dollar signs. We could sell these music videos. Sometimes they would sell in compilations, and they would sell on laser discs or, video cassettes. But it really never really took off as a business. Thriller would be an exception because that was a first kind of long-form artful video, and people would go out and buy that. Sony Music or Columbia Records, then they marketed it pretty much as a, as a hot item.
Aside from the impact that Michael Jackson had just by being kind of the first black artist to be on MTV.
Well, he wasn't the first. He was the first one. There was Prince and Purple Rain preceded that, and a bunch of. There was you'd really have to look back and say, well, who were black artists who were playing rock and roll? Jimi Hendrix would have made it, but it wasn't like so much it was racial. Mm-hmm. It was like we're not playing R&B music, or. Well, that was, of course, before hip-hop. But that kind of R&B music is not fit our format. So, therefore, a lot of black people didn't get on.
Well, aside from those early Michael Jackson tracks, what influence would you say Michael Jackson has had on the music video form?
Well, he really lit it up and took it to a level of professionalism. And what we saw happen after that was a lot of people spending more money making music videos, giving more money to directors, hiring bigger directors. That was Bob Giraldi directed a lot of that, John Landis. So all of a sudden, to have a thing like Lionel Richie would come in and spend $1 million on a video called Dancing on the Ceiling. And you go, wow, we used to make music videos for like $10,000. And now it became almost some kind of ego showpiece for people to compete and be seen. So it was pretty massive, and it really connected MTV to a whole other audience segment that maybe hadn't been watching, and our viewership soared.
Now, when Thriller, the video came out, I recall it was an event. That it seemed like it was presented as an event.
We presented it as an event, and then we would run. I remember doing ads for like People magazine and places like that. We'd actually show the times that we were going to air it. We'd air it 4 times a day, and we'd run all the times, and you'd be able to look at our Nielsen ratings and just go straight up when Michael Jackson came around.
Where did that idea come from to have really a long-form video like that? Almost like a mini movie.
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. I guess they just thought, let's break through where Michael Jackson, when it was a lot of things hit at once. And, you know, it's like, why did Bob Dylan make like a Rolling Stone 6 minutes long?
Was there any input, do you know, from MTV at that time to the process of producing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Did that...
we tried to keep our hands totally out of helping people or giving them advice about making music videos.
Did that affect, from that point on, did it affect production costs on music videos, would you say?
Yeah, they all went up. They all went up. It was, artists would say, I want a video like, you know, so-and-so did a big video. I mean, I'm a major artist, and now all artists were making music videos. Bruce Springsteen, everybody wanted to make them. And you know, a lot of the legacy artists who were used to big advances, and remember they were all minting money at the time, and the labels were fat, they would say, I want more money spent on me. I'm an important artist to you.
Right. How about the, were artists ever rejected because their videos just basically sucked? I mean, the production of them, the production values?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have these big meetings on, I can't remember, Tuesday, and the whole music industry used to wait on pins and needles. I mean, you'd get like 50 videos, and they'd watch 50 videos. It used to be we'd have like 8, and it got up to 30, 40, 50 videos a week submitted. Maybe they'd only add 10, and they would change rotations. It was, you know, quite a whole dance. So a lot of videos, even ones that looked good, didn't get on. So there was a big question. We were like the biggest promotional force in the music business. So, you know, the presidents of the labels would call. At one point I became, you know, the general manager of MTV. So I was all of a sudden then dealing with all these heavyweight label presidents who would be calling up and asking for favors or this or that, or wondering why the hell, how the hell can you reject this? Got to be very time consuming.
Along the way, as you were promoted, I guess first ahead of sales and marketing, and then as you made your path through there, was it during these promotions, was it adding on duties or was it separate duties? Did you just add on more to your plate?
No, I became, I'm trying to think, I was director of marketing at MTV. I became vice president of marketing at MTV, pretty much the same job with a bigger title. And then I became the general manager of MTV, working for Bob Pittman. So all of a sudden now I'm dealing with programming, promotion, sales, I had the whole thing. And after that, I became president of the company.
When David Horowitz came on and replaced Jack Schneider, I think, as CEO, did things change, or was it...
Well, from where I was sitting, there wasn't a big change. David was a great guy. He had a great style about him, and he was very collegial and interested, but they pretty much left us alone. It was like, I don't know quite what they're doing down there, but they seem to have it together. And Bob Pittman pretty much ran the show. I mean, Bob was a very, very impressive take-charge guy, and he would take care of David or whoever else was our boss. And he was a hard guy to argue with because he had such conviction, and we had a lot of wind at our back.
Do you have a personal favorite music video?
Yeah, it was one of the first ones. It's called Skate Away by Dire Straits. It was actually a video that the band didn't appear in, and it's actually a video that that preceded the birth of MTV. And it's a video that I like so much that we made it part of the first promotional tapes when we go around and try and sell the idea of the channel, because I thought, now this is unbelievable editing, good production values, there's no band in it. It's sort of like a new art form. I still like it to this day.
And speaking of Dire Straits, when they released, I guess, Money for Nothing, was it a surprise with that Sting line, I want my MTV, to you guys?
That was
A happy surprise?
That was one of the greatest things that ever happened, because in those days you could be a global star. Dire Straits was a global star. And what I found out subsequently, because we really went on an ambitious international expansion, that became a worldwide hit. So everywhere we went in the world, I'm talking about, Hong Kong, India, anywhere in Europe, that's how people first heard about MTV, was through the Dire Straits song. So they did unbelievable marketing job for us outside the country, and of course within the country it was just a great form of validation.
What was Live Aid?
Live Aid was a big concert in 1985 that was going to help raise money for the famine in Ethiopia, and we had been approached by Bob Geldof and a couple of us. They had a meeting with Pittman and some of us about, would we carry this? We said sure, we'd love to. It was a big deal. We never really done a lot of live TV, but let's cover this. This is going to, let's bring this to all our viewers. At the time, we probably had 30 million homes. And then they went out and sold it also to ABC, which was sort of a highlights piece that ABC ran in prime time. And it was a very big event for us in terms of our history and growth and the resonance and the culture and the validation of us. And it was a great day for me because we had a whole setup right on the stage. We were like just off to the stage, off camera, so I watched this great show, and every major artist you ever would imagine was there, and have a front. It was like a little front seat of history. It was the first it wasn't the first benefit concert, but it was the first sort of big global one.
Did viewership increase during that event?
Yeah, we had a 10 rating. You can imagine that.
Wow.
That was like, unbelievable.
Yeah. So how did the MTV Music Video Awards come about?
Well, we said, wouldn't it be great to celebrate the form of the music video? This was like 1983, 84. Let's celebrate the music video form. There's award shows for everything. And maybe in the award show, we could celebrate the artists. We could give rewards to the artists and the directors and make people think who are in this business that it's important, that it's growing, that it's an ascendant field. And at the same time, it would be a great event on the channel. It probably could bring in more money than the ratings might indicate were possible. We could showcase, the first one was in 1984. Bette Midler was the host. It was in Radio City. They closed the city down. It was like, man, you're in New York. We're in the big time. From a bunch of guys who used to operate out of a little studio in Hell's Kitchen. So it was a big punctuation mark on the annual schedule. And, at some point in time, we'd make $50 million in one evening.
So you mentioned yourself that there were a lot of award shows already. What was the idea to make it a different kind of show?
Well, we thought we could kind of inject what we thought was that sort of MTV attitude and spirit. It would be slightly irreverent, a little off color, pushing the band boundaries a little bit, In the first one, Madonna was sort of introduced to the world. She basically was humping the stage to Like a Virgin. And, great move for her. And, the awards has since and still are become some annual sort of sideshow to the popular culture. Anybody who had something to promote or say, or somebody who's controversial would show up at the show. But it became fun. It also was something that allowed us to really increase our production abilities. We didn't use outside producers. There was no people who really could deal with someone like MTV who didn't pay any money. There was no independent producers who were producing big stuff for Hollywood. So we decided we would, groom our own, and we would start off really simple, but we got to the point where we could produce major award shows and other types of things. And so the aptitude of the staff was great. That was a real benefit, one of the real side benefits I thought of. People thought, well, we can do almost anything. We kind of taught ourselves. We brought in the beginning Don Ohlmeyer, who was an outside producer, to give us some tips. And, we had a very young, the average age at MTV in those days working there was probably 25, 26 years old.
What went into picking the artists and the presenters for those early shows especially?
Endless meetings.
And the hosts even.
It'll be endless meetings, and we talk about, everything on the host, from Q scores, so who's cool, who can we get, and in terms of picking the artist, everybody wanted a slot, so the people who dealt with the labels, the talent artist relations people and the programming people would yell and scream and fight, and they eventually come up. I guess it's still like that on any award show with anybody who we're going to put on there. You want a certain amount of mainstream stuff, you want some new stuff, you want, to achieve some kind of balance.
So what did the Video Music Awards do for MTV?
I think it kind of said in New York City, boy, we arrived. You know, you had Mayor Koch there, and we were kind of validated as more of a mainstream media vehicle. It allowed us to bring in advertisers like American Express and others that had been unable or unwilling to be near us. So revenue-wise, we kind of ramped up to another level. I think to everyone, it made MTV seem more important, and it made our job a bit more easy.
Any behind-the-scenes moments you can share with us about any of those award shows, flubs or special performances, or what's your kind of take on from your experience of those shows?
I've been at so many of those shows. One of the great things about not working there now is I don't have to go to them anymore, but I did greatly enjoy them for many years. But, you know, there'd be a lot of the stuff that would go wrong. I mean, it was always chronicled in the press. I mean, Guns N' Roses would get into a fight with Sammy Hagar, or you know, Courtney Love would get drunk and attack Madonna and throw shoes, or people would run up on the set, or, you know, people would, you know, there'd be all kinds of people would do streaking across the stage.
Off the air, on the air?
On the air, yeah. There was all kinds of things. One time we had a band, I forget who it was, and one of the guys in the band climbed up to the scaffolding of the set and just refused to come down.
Did anything shock you, surprise you?
I was not easily shocked. No. I mean, anything was. It was, you know, always in those days the music business was rife with a lot of colorful figures, and everybody was feeling pretty heady because most of the performers were making a lot of money.
When Viacom took over MTV in 1985, did that change the dynamic? I mean, having a conglomerate take over what seemed like almost like an independent spirit. How did that change?
That was a big deal. We had come along, and we were part of Warner Amex, but Amex was getting out. Warner was really strapped for cash because they had the Atari debacle of the 83, 84, which kind of ballooned, and they didn't have any money, so they had to sell us. Mm-hmm. And we tried to do a leveraged buyout. Bob Pittman led with Teddy Forstman's company, Forstman Little. But at the same time, we had another bid, and we really thought we could become independent. And LBO, that was the word of the day. You know, we would have a leveraged buyout. But in the end of the day, Steve Ross decided to sell us to Viacom, then called Viacom. You know, Sumner Redstone changed the pronunciation. But at that point in time, it was run by Terry. There was a guy named there was a Jules Heimowitz and Terry Elks and Ken Gorman were the people who ran Viacom, which had been the spin-off of CBS in the early 70s of the syndication libraries. They basically had the syndication library, but they had plans to build the beginning of a media conglomerate. They had bought Showtime, they had bought some radio stations, they bought some other properties, and this was a big move for them. But when it happened, it was like ice ran through the building. The golden days are over. We've got a bunch of suits coming in, was what the feeling was. Mm-hmm. And Bob Pittman decided to leave. And a lot of people who were there said, you know, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to cash in on the fame and the career status I've built up at MTV and go somewhere else because this is only going down. We had a very bad first meeting with them. They came to see us in Montauk, where we happened to be having a company retreat. And the first thing they said is, I know a lot of you have stock options. We don't feel they have to be honored. So it was like, come on. So people started heading for the exits. It was a good thing for me because Bob made me the CEO of the company. Maybe first president of the company. They had two presidents. There was me and a fellow named Bob Regani who would be the president. Basically, he was the head of ad sales. I ran everything else.
This was MTV Networks?
Mm-hmm. Okay. MTV Networks now had two presidents. And that lasted for about a year. And I had to interface with the Viacom management and kind of got involved in corporate meetings and learned about what the other divisions were doing and their plans, and spent a lot of time trying to keep the guys off my guys, you know, just like trying to see if we can leave it alone. We have a good thing going, great, strong company culture. No, they don't wear suits and ties. They're probably the worst dressed group of people in New York City, but they're quite successful, and they're kind of tenterhooks right now. So that worked for a while, And then it began really kind of going downhill.
What was MTV Networks in 1987? I mean, what was that an umbrella for?
MTV Networks then was Nickelodeon, Nick at Night, VH1, and MTV.
Okay.
1985, 86, that's what it was. We did not yet have a lot of our other businesses. We had not moved out internationally. So it was that, and we were making maybe $20 million a year. You know, we were sort of a blip still. You know, we made a lot of noise in the culture, but we really weren't monetizing it yet. Things hadn't really kicked in financially. And these guys really wanted to run things on a pretty tight leash. So at one point, that was the age of the big buyout battles. And at one point, Sumner Redstone, who was known somehow of a guy who was sort of a corporate raider in a way, he made a play. He thought he could buy and displace the Viacom management team because he thought they were ill-serving the organization, and he saw an opportunity for himself. So one day, they had a big battle. And then one day, Bob Pittman called me, and he said, you know, I'm out of the company, but Sumner Redstone called me, and he'd like to meet with you. And I said, I'd be happy to meet with him, but, you know, if I get caught meeting with him, I'm probably going to lose my job. He says, well, let's see if it can be confidential. So then Sumner Redstone called me, and he invited me to the Carlisle Hotel where he had a suite. And we met, and I told him that I thought that this company had unbelievable future. We were just getting warmed up, that there was other networks we could launch, there was international business we could have, that the MTV business was just beginning to monetize itself. Nickelodeon was a monster, blah, blah, blah. Great creative enterprise, but it's very fragile right now because people feel we're not going to get the kind of money to invest to build this. They don't get a sense that the Viacom management really respects or enjoys what we do. And, you know, people are just going to leave, and we have a great team. And then I said, you know, you got to come down there one day. You'd really get a kick out of it. We were then at 1775 Broadway, which was at 57th Street. Mm-hmm. So the next morning he came, and I took him through the MTV floor, which was like, it was the wild mismatch of people, and it was he just thought it was the most creative thing he'd ever seen in his life, and that experience really fortified him to go all the way and win this battle, and ultimately he prevailed, and he then hired Frank Biondi to be the CEO of the company. Sumner recognized he wasn't a media heavyweight. Frank had run HBO. He brought in Frank. And Frank set up a breakfast with me at the, I remember it was a hotel on 55th Street, eluding and I can't remember the name, but he said to me, so what's the story? I said, well, we've got a great thing here, and we're happy, but he says, well, what's this dual management role you have? I said, well, I don't think it works. I don't think it works with myself and this gentleman, Bob Briganti. And he said, okay, I'd like to make you the CEO of MTV Networks. And then he fired Bob Briganti. So that was the summer of 1987. And that began, I held that post as a CEO of MTV Networks until 1994. So that's a whole other chapter.
The startup of Nickelodeon, was it the same kind of creative idea to have it set apart in terms of like branding? I mean, I remember specifically in the early days of Nickelodeon that it tends to overshadow Disney Channel because it sort of had an attitude of empowering the kids. You know, like kids are smarter than grown-ups almost, or their parents.
Yeah, well, there wasn't really a Disney Channel yet. I mean, there was Disney, of course, and Disney was the powerhouse in television. And we started Nickelodeon. It really just started as an outgrowth of a thing they had set up in Columbus, Ohio, called Cube, and they decided to do a children's channel, and they basically just licensed international animation. It was a really cheap thing, and it had a silver ball was the logo, and it really didn't have any style or panache or cachet. And then a couple of years into it, once we got going, Bob Pittman said, you know, let's soup this up and make it kind of hipper and cooler. And Jerry Laybourne, who was the head of Nickelodeon at the time, the head of programming, we went into the orange logo, and we came up with a really good business analysis that said, there was an opportunity to take out Disney on television, that they were increasingly seen as old and stodgy and kind of traditional, and we could be a bit more cutting edge, sort of following in the wake of the MTV experience, cutting edge and modern. We could embody ourselves with a great kind of set of graphics and on-air look, and that would be very novel at the time. And we could employ a lot of really brilliant people whom now we knew who could do this type of thing, because we sort of invented that whole style of network promotion and animation, and most of those people work for us. So it was a very successful repositioning of Nickelodeon, and we came to the thing that one of the great positioners of it, we adopted this attitude as us versus them. It's kids. We're for kids. We're not for your parents. It's not like your parents are bad, but we got a secret little world and you're in it, and we're not with the big parents. And we were it was a huge success. It took a while to take off, and it took a couple shows like Double Dare. We did the first game show for kids, and we'd make that show for $10,000-$15,000 an episode. And we'd start getting more ambitious in our original production, and to the point where in 1990, I remember in 1988, we had an offsite with Redstone and Biondi up in Vermont, and they came up and said, "We have $20 million we can give you for investment. What's the greatest ideas you can come up with?" So we all huddled, and we came back and said, "Launch us into original animation. We'd like to start 3 animated series that we own and control, and we would be creator-based rather than go to like a big animation house in Hollywood. We're going to find people who have ideas in their head, and we're going to get into the animation business. We're going to start owning and controlling our own programming besides game shows." And that was Rugrats, or Ren and Stimpy, and
Beavis and Butthead, was that?
no, Beavis and Butthead
was
was on
later?
MTV.
Oh, that's right.
There was a Doug. It was called Doug, and
Okay.
there were 3 shows. So we
Right,
basically set up these people in the animation business, learned it ourselves, staffed it ourselves, and that single decision was probably the biggest economic victory or change point in the development of the company, because out of that has come billions and billions of dollars of value with the SpongeBob and licensing and merchandising and international sales and whatever. But Nickelodeon was very much reinvented in the wake of MTV's success at the direction of Bob and others, and it went on, of course, to become, still is, the #1 network on a full-day basis on cable to this day,
And the green
in
slime
terms of
was-
ratings.
The green slime is like maybe the signature
Yes.
thing that came out of there. And I recall it came from a show called You Can't Do That on TV.
Yeah, you can't do that on TV, which was sort of like SCTV.
Right, yeah.
It was early on. It's sort of a sketch comedy with a regular cast. Yeah, and they would
Right.
slime people. People loved the green slime. They still slime people at the Kids' Choice Awards every year.
So I think they look forward to it, actually. It's like the whole event, diving into it, everything like that. So how would you describe your management style? How do you manage?
Well, I'm collaborative. I try and be a good listener. I try and enforce some kind of team spirit, and I was a big believer in decentralization. To run a operation that became that big, you couldn't be hands-on about anything, so you really need to have trusted people, and in turn they'd be somewhat decentralized. And I really believe that at our heart we were a creative company, and I wanted that to be sort of seen as sort of the company cultural ethos. I thought if we can build a strong company culture, and says, what were we? We were sort of low-cost, innovative, creative producers, and we were not what goes on in Hollywood. We were very much the antithesis of that. And how could we get a lot of young, interesting people to come work here and make it the kind of place where people would want to bang down their doors to get a job, and we would take people right out of schools. But how to foster an informal, fun, interesting workplace where creativity was valued as the primary goal. And if we had that was part of that audience connection, things would fall into place. So there was always a raucous place to work. I mean, people, I think, felt pretty free, and we had sort of a real golden age there for many, many years. We were immune to many of the economic recessions, and no matter what it was, our sales were, we were going up double digits every year. For 16 years, we never missed our goals. We always increased 20% growth every year on the bottom line and on sales. But as part of that was having a loyal group of people who reported to me that I had good personal relationships and rapport with. And, occasionally people would be replaced. But if you were to ask people, they would say that in those days it was a pretty healthy company culture. I made that really a competitive advantage. But working style, hard work. Play hard. It was informal as much as we could be.
But was your hope, or you were in charge actually, I mean, did you insist, if that's the right word, that the management down that other executives under you would kind of behave the same way?
Yeah, that was always that could be a struggle because, of course, you have somebody kind of not understanding the rules or going out of control, and we have mechanisms to deal with that. Someone who'd be too hard on their people. So that was, we try and set in place certain HR mechanisms to catch that. I would also just say that one of my jobs I thought was to try and keep that vibe of a creative company sort of immune to the realities of business in place as long as we could. As we became bigger and bigger, it became harder and harder. But I never would talk to the rank and file about how much money we were making or what the corporate, that there was any kind of request from the corporate people to really squeeze us. We were setting a high bar on our own and tried to keep the suits, so to speak, out of the rank and file life. And, that worked pretty much for a long time. I mean, you'll find if you're running a conglomerate and you've got one division that's performing well, you're going to spend your time on the divisions that aren't. And, by virtue of the fact that we had this unbelievable financial performance, Frank Biondi first and Mel Karmazin second as my bosses would pretty much give us free rein, and they both also understood what we were trying to do. They understood we had a unique kind of culture there, and they didn't want to mess it up.
When Redstone came in and took over, and you were CEO of MTV Networks, did that impact how you were able to manage, or did you have free reign, or was there a change?
I had pretty much free reign. I mean, they would say. I mean, obviously, I had to learn how to be a CEO. Mm-hmm. This was 7 years earlier. I was, working in Afghanistan, so I was, So you kind of, you get mentored and you learn and you watch carefully when you're not the CEO.
Who was your mentor? Is there one person who?
I was mentored, I would say, to some extent by Bob Pittman, who was really inspiring to me. Because, the guy was like 10 years younger than me. When he came in, he was my boss. He was 24. I was 34 years old. Yeah. And he was, impressive. And a great guy. We're still friends to this day. And then, I picked up a lot from my boss, Frank Biondi, who really was very much a hands-off guy. They'd say, look, here's a financial envelope of what you got to do. I'm not going to say a lot more to you. You can figure out what strategies. We'd like to see this. We'd like to see that. We'd like to see a little more or less of this or that. But it was wondrous because we would say, I can remember a day in 1989 when someone came in at my staff meeting on a Tuesday morning and slipped me a piece of paper and said, HBO has just announced they're starting a comedy channel. And I said, wow, this is, HBO, which was the big industry powerhouse, is getting into our business. They're going into basic cable. They're going into basic cable. They're going to go up against us. This could not be good. Then they'll start music channels and other things. So we sat around the table for an hour and a half and we said, Fred Seibert again, why don't we announce a comedy channel? Let's announce one today because we'll be in every press release. We know a bit of comedy because we do TV comedy on Nick at Night, which has been an unbelievable success. We started that for $1 million. And, we didn't really say, okay, let's announce we're doing a comedy channel and we'll call it Ha. So we sent out a press release like a few hours later. This is no clearance from Frank Biondi other than a phone call, and he loved the fact they were going up against HBO or Redstone or what the financial consequences might be. But we just decided, they're doing a comedy channel, we're going to do a comedy channel. It goes back to that sort of Turner, CMT, cable music channel and VH1 thing. Let's fight them. And they thought their big announcement was going to, we were in every story that ever happened. We fought it out with them for years. They never really got distribution, neither did we. And then we ended up merging into Comedy Central. And then we ended up buying their interest out years later. And Comedy Central is now, top 10 cable network. But the idea that you could just decide around a table, let's launch another network, and that your boss would go, yeah, that's good. And you would not have to really even present a business plan for it, but sort of the kind of loose and free management style there was. I mean, a lot of places now, they say, well, let's analyze that, let's look at that. Right. This was like, no, we just go for stuff.
So was Comedy Central developed somewhere else, and then Ha kind of became Comedy Central?
Well, HBO launched the Comedy Channel, which was going to be short-form stand-up, sort of in the mode of MTV, with comedy jockeys, they called them. Mm-hmm. We said we'd do, we took the Nick at Night staff, and we said, okay, let's pool this out. I said, for credibility, let's hire Fred Silverman. We'd say he's going to work for us. That'll sound good. He could help us out in scheduling. We'll license a lot of more old TV comedy shows. We did a production deal with Castle Rock, that looked good on paper, a development deal, and it looked like all of a sudden we have a substantial, array of talent. We're saying this stand-up comedy stuff doesn't work. We're going to do a network of TV comedy. And we developed that in-house, and we ran it on a shoestring. Fought really hard with the cable operators not to take the Comedy Channel, but take us instead, as they did. So most of the cable operators who had vested interests didn't want to annoy either Viacom or Time Warner would stand on the fence, so neither of us got distribution. Finally, in the end, they said, Michael Fuchs and Frank Biondi, who used to work together, let's start it. Let's put down our guns and form a joint venture. So I felt really good about that because we forestalled their entry into our business that would have, had they been successful, would have allowed them to build up a suite of other basic channels, and they would have been a huge, well-funded, very serious threat to our business.
So the day you were installed as the brand new CEO of MTV Networks, after all the kind of congratulations died down and you had a moment to yourself, did you have a grand plan, or did you kind of compartmentalize, here's what needs to change, here's what could be, what was your kind of initial approach?
I knew that, we wanted to keep the corporate culture strong and powerful, that we wanted to launch additional networks, that we had to change MTV, which was showing some signs of weakness, and we needed to creatively reinvent it. The first time we really would go about doing that. Our destiny was more and more to own and control more of our own programming, and then we would begin to go international. And because at that point in time, in the late 80s, markets in Europe were for the first time really beginning to deregulate. There were satellites in place. Because, in the UK or France and Germany, it was pretty much only state-run TV. So there was no tradition of independent television, cable, or satellite. There was no labor pool of people who could come work for you there. But we thought the opening and deregulation and the idea that a pan-Europe model could develop, we could slip in there. And that was sort of, those were sort of some of the, we had a plan. We wanted to get stronger in everything we did and do more things.
How do you deal with the ever-changing demographic? I mean, just the aging of 15-year-olds watching, like, say, MTV, 5 years or 20. And
well, we had when we saw at MTV clearly ratings beginning to go down, and the format, the novelty of the music video format with the VJs was beginning to wear, and increasingly we tried to keep it up by just playing the hits, and then we realized, we've seen, if your really core audience is 18 to 24-year-olds, they've all passed through. We probably need to radically restructure and reinvent things. And I set up these SWAT teams at MTV, 4 SWAT teams that you go away, go to someone's apartment somewhere, and think for a week about how we could reinvent this thing. What are some of the things we can do to just, let's say if we could tear it all down and start from scratch. And we came back, and it was a very productive exercise. And we realized that the future of MTV couldn't just continue to be about music videos, which were largely a commodity programming, 3 minutes in length. And we were in a ratings-driven business now. The stakes were higher. We had to be able to deliver ratings and get advertisers, so that we would begin to integrate some longer form programming, and that we would be not just about music, but be also about some of the things that the music was about: fashion, movies, other types of things in the popular culture. I looked as a model for that. Rolling Stone magazine, which did begin, great youth brand, in the 60s. It was all rock and roll all the time. But when they would find in the late 70s, when the sort of disco era was coming in, there was a less of an interest in music, and their circulation went down, their advertising went down, the buzz around it went down. They went through the same sort of thing, and they said, well, you know, we can't be subject to the vagaries of power of the cycles of the music business. Let's get into comedy. So all of a sudden you'd see Billy Crystal on the cover, or David Letterman on the cover, or Tom Cruise on the cover. And we adopted the same approach, and we said, we would start shows like The Week in Rock. We would take our news and make it like a weekly thing. We had a let's see if we can also become sort of a talent incubator. We started a show called Remote Control, a game show taking from Nickelodeon's success with Double Dare. We made a pilot for $3,000 in somebody's basement. Then we produced these for $10,000 an episode, Ken Ober and Colin Quinn. But then we had PAs working on the show like Adam Sandler, Ben Stiller, some of the big comedy players today. So many people came and worked at MTV in those early years who've gone on to these amazing comedy careers. Judd Apatow, others. So we sort of became a little hothouse in a way. And then we started other types of long-form programming. We did shows about the movies. They were really simple at the time. Chris Conley, who's now on ABC News, he was the host of that. You probably remember some of these shows. And we saw our ratings begin to go up, and we realized that we needed to periodically reinvent MTV every 3 or 4 years to give it some juice, acknowledge the fact that the demo has kind of moved on, keep it fresh. And that became a challenge, because usually just when you're really in the groove and really hitting it, that's the time you should be changing it. So your instinct is to kind of keep it the same and do more of the same, when in fact your instinct really should be, this is the time I got to think about what's the next generation of what MTV is. So a lot of my life at those days was spent about trying to gauge those times for periodic reinventions of the various networks that we had to keep them fresh and relevant and creatively alive.
Was part of that thinking that, I mean, I think clearly now the 18 to 24 demo who watched MTV might even be surprised it used to be a wall-to-wall music video channel.
Oh, yeah.
Was that the thinking that, I mean, we talked about this, that MTV, the meaning is not really so much music television, but it's like it's a brand unto itself. Was you thinking about that back then?
There was always, what do you mean? We got to be about music. We're music television. We're supposed to be that 24 hours a day. So there was this purist argument that we got to go down with the music business. And there was other people saying, no, you know, we've gotten good at producing shows. Creatively, we want to stretch out. We've shown we can do award shows. We want to do game shows. We want to do animation. We want to do other kinds of things. So there was a force like, you know, so MTV Raps. I mean, there was always people coming. That was an idea that came up from Ted Demme, who was a PA at the time, you know, I mean. But there was always an argument about, we always realized that we needed music. Our soul was music, and that we couldn't walk away too far from it. We got a lot of image value out of it. The stars in the culture were musical stars. And while we could put some of this on as sort of punctuation marks in the strategy, we'd still be largely about music. And we try and reformat the way we present that. Of course, as time went on, and like The Real World and other shows, I mean, now you turn on MTV, I don't know if they run any music anymore, which is something I don't like, but I'm not there anymore. I have nothing to say about it.
Maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay. How did MTV News start up?
That was a feature pretty much from the beginning. We would do news breaks. The VJs would need the news copy. We said, we'd say, MTV is going to have news, but it's not going to be the Queen of England that's coming to America. It's going to be Queens coming to America. So we set up a news division that got pretty good. And then in '87, in the wake of this reinvention, Doug Herzog said, let's hire some faces to do the news. Let's hire Kurt Loder. Kurt Loder had worked at Rolling Stone. I think he's still working at MTV, 25 years later. But well, let's put a face on it. Let's get more professional about it. And it became an important part of what we did.
Could you, I'd like to mention some of the other shows that were developed and ran on MTV. Just you can make a brief comment about it or your take on it. Headbangers Ball.
Headbangers Ball was like a specialty show, we'd call it, for that. There was a huge heavy metal audience out there. That was a music that was alienating to most of the audience, unless it was sort of mainstream. So we decided we could, in a late night, one night or another, we'd get a heavy metal DJ and we'd do a specialty show all about heavy metal and hard rock. And that way we could get our foot in that genre of music, but not necessarily have it 24/7. Same with 120 Minutes was basically alternative music of the day. We do that on Sunday nights for 2 hours, and we'd be able to tell record companies, yeah, we'll play your video in this specialty show.
And also, if you can, talk about maybe the impact of these shows. If it was a good fit, it turned out to be a good idea.
Well, it's great. I mean, you meet people all the time. They say, oh, man, I remember all 120 Minutes. I used to watch that every Sunday night. That was my favorite show. That's where I learned about this, that, or the other band. And same with Headbangers. It's funny, people remember those shows.
And when you mentioned Yo MTV Raps?
Yo MTV Raps really took the rap business, and which was new, and took it out of urban America and put it in the white living rooms all over middle America. And it was the first time people had really seen this type of music, which again had an active audience, was alienating, was brand new to the culture. And we would pretty much play rap music in the afternoons and evenings, and within that show, it was a huge success.
MTV Unplugged.
That came about in the early 90s. We had a Video Music Awards with, at one point, Bon Jovi, which is a big band of the day, Richie Sambora and John Bon Jovi came out and did sort of an acoustic set, a couple of their songs. People loved it. And we said, there was a fellow named Alex Coletti, and he made a presentation. Let's get the best bands we can find, all the bands we have relationships with, and ask them to turn off the electricity, and let's do an acoustic shows. And, we sold something like 250 million records at some point. I mean, we Eric Clapton, we had so many great moments with Unplugged. And it was a real music imager, did very well for us.
And Alternative Nation?
Alternative Nation was the next incarnation of 120 Minutes. It became a more ambitious, more regularly scheduled alternative music show.
Was there a transition when grunge came in the 90s for MTV? Was it just more of an acceptance of that and integration into the channel?
Well, it kind of fit because, it was rock, it was Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and all those. It kind of fit in well. It was, these guys weren't the glamorous rock stars. They were the antithesis of the hair bands. They were, wearing flannel, but they resonated really well with the audience. And we, our center of gravity kind of moved to Seattle for a while, Sub Pop Records and everything. It was like great. There was another movement in the music business going on.
With the whole kind of attitude of MTV to begin with, and then a lot of the shows that were part of the MTV networks, what did you have to deal with in terms of, I know there was basic cable networks, but with censorship? I mean, the traditional networks, they had their own standards and practices. What did you have to come up with? How did you deal with censorship?
We needed a standard and practices department, because clearly, this was something David Horowitz had really impressed on us as the stakes were getting higher, and maybe there was a sense we were more irresponsible than he would like. We used to have a joke. People used to say, "Oh yeah, we have standards. They're low, but we have them." But we would have to say to advertisers, we're not using profanity. There's no gratuitous sex or violence, and sort of the usual things. And we would have to send back a lot of music videos, which would always be an issue. They would make edits or changes, and people would think, oh, we're so conservative. But other people would think, oh my God, this is still the work of the devil. So it was like hard to do, but we recognized. And there used to be a woman, Michelle von Feld. She was the head of standards and practices, and she would just sit in her office all day and watch all this stuff and just call me up and go, you're not going to believe this. But yeah, so we had to be able to say that we had a department, that we took this seriously, that we had standards, that, because our distributors and our advertisers, this was important to them. And, We couldn't let the full id of the music industry run wild on television. I mean, it just was not the place for it on a commercial television anyway.
And there were music videos that were either recut or, I mean, that were rejected, weren't there?
Oh, a lot. And they would do. They would just go for the cheap shot and get the front page of the New York Post. And Madonna banned by MTV. There was a couple of instances on her when she was on her sex kick. They would purposely hope we would say no, so they could get the publicity bang that they were banned from MTV. It's all kind of silly if you think about it these days, but in those days it was fair marketing strategies.
How did the Real World come to MTV?
Well, we decided, we had post 87 moved into various program forums, that one of the things we thought could be interesting, and we always had the creative groups trying to push the boundaries. Said, we need a soap opera. Why can't we do a soap opera that would be like, people are going to be interested in the lives of kids, and we could reflect about the modern generation of young people today, and it would be interesting. So, okay, not cast it out, but work it out, budget it out. And it came to me and we said, this is really good, but we don't have the kind of money to do this because, we have to now hire writers. It was to be a scripted soap opera. We had never done anything really scripted before. Hire writers, we don't have any money for that. So then Doug Herzog went back with his team and came back and they said, well, if we can't hire writers, someone says, why don't we just put a bunch of kids in a loft and put some cameras in the walls and tape them, and then we'll post-produce it into shows, because post-production is really our greatest aptitude production-wise. Mm-hmm. We're great at that. And hence reality TV was born, or at least this generation of it. And people would say we had some great plan. It was just that we didn't have any money. We can't hire writers, so let the kids say what the hell they want, and we'll edit it all together. So, and they're still on the air, and it's as successful as ever. That's
a great story too. I mean, just almost it's like serendipity, almost created a
total
what
serendipity.
Is, like you said, it certainly is thought of as the beginning of the current reality.
Who knows what it was going to bring on to us? But yeah.
What did you think of it? What did you think of the final result of the first season of The Real World?
It wasn't that successful. The first season wasn't that successful. What we found was that every subsequent season, unlike the normal law of television, where ratings might go up for a while, but then they go down, every subsequent season became more and more popular. We got better at casting them. Of course, they became a bit more stilted, but they were a bit more, we got better at it. And all of a sudden, The Real World had itself become sort of a little sub-brand, and it stood for something, and people were curious. They were curious to see what people their age were doing. Of course, over time, it became a bit exaggerated, but the early ones were quite innocent, and it kicked off so much of what we see all over TV today.
Well, apparently it's still popular. I mean, last time I checked in about a year ago, it seemed like they were very self-aware of the cast members of being on the show.
And you look at reality shows now, they know that, it's outsized characters, and that's how you make a name for yourself. You're Snooki in Jersey Shore, or you're some wild character on The Real World, or any number of those other shows, and, next thing you know, you have a career.
So why do you think it became more popular? You think it was that the characters were relatable?
I think there was an innate interest of people watching people their own age. When you're 18 to 24, when you're that age, when you're a teenager, you're always looking for clues, visual clues, behavioral clues from others. And that was a place where you could see a lot of that, and they found it fascinating. So there was that basic attraction. And I think that built over time as we got better at doing it.
When MTV News covered the 1992 presidential campaign, do you feel like they became more legitimate in the eyes of what they called the mainstream news media?
Yeah, that was another real seminal moment in terms of, we had the Video Music Awards, Michael Jackson, there was things that went along, but the Choose or Lose campaign really, we decided, well, let's go into politics. I mean, we were like, we've gone into reality programming, we've gone into animation with Beavis and Butthead, we've tried this, we tried that. What else are young people interested in? We said, well, young people, they don't vote much. They're not interested. And then with the birth of the Clinton campaign and, a young candidate and a lot of concern among young voters, we saw an opportunity to tap into that and see if we could take ourselves to yet another level. And we didn't know anything about the political world, so we hired some consultants to help us get plugged into people who knew that world, and off we went. And it was a huge success from a business standpoint, because what it was able to do was to bring some advertisers in from the sidelines who just thought, no, that MTV is just a little too risque for me. It kind of mainstreamed us in a way.
And that was Rock the Vote, right? Is that?
No, Rock the Vote was a campaign we were into a little before that,
Okay.
which was a public service campaign, the record industry, in response to this idea that they were irresponsible. They started Rock the Vote to be a nonpartisan thing about freedom of speech. That was one of the impetuses of us to create our own version that would be broader and would be bipartisan too, called Choose or Lose.
Do you think that there's a real legacy there about the fact that with the legitimacy of MTV News and the trying to bring in young voters, that it was proven to be very successful. Basically, it got the attention of the kind of older politicians sitting in Washington who didn't even know how to plug a computer in, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we saw, first of all, in that election, the amount of 18 to 24-year-olds who voted was up 20%. Big, first time it really gone up in decades. Secondly, Clinton took full advantage of it. You know, you can remember he was on Arsenio Hall, but he was all over MTV. He did a lot of things. We repeatedly asked George Bush, through all these Republican consultants we had hired, please do stuff. And at the end, it was only at the very last 2 weeks before the campaign, he elected to do an interview with us. So Tabitha Soren, who had been sort of our heady, Stanford-educated news correspondent, she went to interview George Bush, and he made her do it on the tail of a train that was moving. So there was absolutely it played so badly for him and actually hurt him more than it helped him with young people. It was like dismissing you young people. You know, it was just a patronizing. The idea in George H.W. Bush's mind that he would ever have to appear on MTV was such an anathema to him. But in the end, he was, sort of forced to do it, but did it in a half-hearted way.
So let's talk about Beavis and Butthead, which I hear is coming back. But
yeah, that was that was one of my favorites.
How did that get? How did you get into that?
We had a guy named Abby Triculi who was the head of animation at MTV, and he did initially a lot of the interstitial stuff and the look and the style. And he went to an animation festival in, I'd say, late '80s, early '90s in Austin, Texas, and found a guy named Mike Judge, who had a short called Frog Baseball that was in this festival. And it was Beavis and Butthead with the characters. And they were basically pitching frogs at a guy. Beavis would throw a frog at Butthead, and Butthead would hit it with a bat. And it was very funny and cruel and edgy. And, they had the AC/DC T-shirt, the whole thing. And God, I just loved it. We all loved it. And we said, let's get in business with Mike Judd and let's see how we can do a show. Let's take those characters and see what you can develop. So they came up with a format where they'd be sitting on the couch commenting on videos, because we knew that's what a lot of kids would do. They'd say, oh, look at this video, look what the guy's wearing, and make crazy comments. And they were sort of those stoner heavy metal cats that everyone knew someone like that in school. So it really resonated. It was clever and funny. It was cheap when we didn't have enough money to really pay for full episodes. So, we'd play music videos. They basically were like VJs, and they would intro videos. So we'd have maybe in a half an hour, 6 minutes of them, and the rest would be music videos. And that was a huge hit, and I think reflected well on us. It was edgy, and everything that we would strive to be was sort of, for that moment, embodied in Beavis and Butthead.
Back in that frog video, the frog animation, were they called Beavis and Butthead then?
Yeah, but they were called Beavis and Butthead, but the main focus was called Frog Baseball. So the idea that we'd have a show called Beavis and Butthead based on those characters using their names, that was new.
Okay. We're going to change a bit.